Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, or if you're new here, welcome. My name is Selina, and in today's video I'm going to be showing you how to sew Skort as well as how to draft a pattern for it. This tutorial is definitely beginner friendly and was actually way easier than I originally anticipated, and you're going to need roughly 2 meters of a fabric of your choosing. Mine was more of a mid-weight wool woven blend, but you could definitely use a lighter weight fabric like a cotton or a heavier weight fabric like a denim, which I'd love to try with this project in the future. Although I don't typically do this, I created a mock-up for this pattern, which you can see throughout the video. I do definitely recommend doing this if you're going to be using a more expensive fabric. I paid £14 per meter for mine, so I definitely wanted to make sure it fit before I cut into it. If you found this video helpful, please let me know down in the comments below, and I'll show you at the end of the video how I styled the skirt, but without further ado, let's get into the tutorial. This is what my second mock-up looks like. You can see I didn't bother adding a button or zipper and just pinned it in place instead. The adjustments needed were minor. As you can see, the shorts are poking out under the skirt, so I just needed to adjust the hem, and I did end up taking a couple centimeters off the waist because I wanted it to sit more mid-rise. We'll start by putting a pair of well-fitted shorts on tracing paper, sketching paper, or your preferred medium of pattern making, and then simply sketch around the garment, making sure it's inside out and folded in half. Once you have the rough outline, you can go in and define this by adding your seam allowance. I used 1 cm seam allowance around the whole perimeter except for the bottom where I allowed 4 cm for hemming. For reference, I've added my personal measurements including seam allowance. The back is pretty much the same as the front, except you will need to make the crotch longer, and I added some darts at the waist, which is 2 cm wide and goes down by 10 cm. The darts should be placed evenly in the middle of either side. Once again, you can see my personal measurements on the screen. When measuring the skirt panel, make sure to start from the side seam of your shorts measuring across the front of your body. Make sure the side that will have the belt loop to attach to the button is cut at a slight angle. This is what the pattern looks like after drafting it on sketch paper, and you should have 2 of each cut out. To begin, I started by taking the 2 strap pieces and placing them together where I will sew around the edges, making sure to leave the bottom open. Once I had sewn around the edges, I cut off roughly half a centimeter on all sides, making sure not to cut too close to the stitches. I then folded this inside out and pushed out the edges using a pair of scissors. Next we want to sandwich the strap in between the 2 skort panels, making sure it's right sides out and facing inwards. Then sew the top, slanted side and bottom, leaving the last side open so that we can flip the skort inside out later. I then chopped off roughly half a centimeter around all 3 sides. After chopping the edges off, I turned the skort right sides out and took this to my ironing board. Depending on which side you will have the skirt panel, this step will vary slightly, but for me, I will sandwich the skirt panel right sides out between the back right and front right short, making sure to leave 2 centimeters on the top. Then sew the sides together. I forgot to do this before sewing the side seams, so I just added my dart, sewed it, and then ironed everything flat. Here's what the project should be looking like at this stage. I then serged the entire bottom of the shorts. Then I placed the front and back crotch together, wrong sides facing, and sewed, then serged them. After I completed the same steps with the remaining pieces, except for sewing the sides together, I placed the newly sewed short pieces inside the skort piece, right sides facing, and you want to make sure that the crotch seams on both pieces line up as closely as possible. Once everything is pinned nicely in place, we can sew along the U-shape. Once we sewed almost everything together, this is what the project should be looking like. I then made a mark on the open-sided short pieces for reference later on when I will install the zipper. I didn't show this, but I sewed up until that point from the bottom of the shorts. Before I install the zipper, I'm going to hem the shorts, and I will do this by folding up the bottom by 4 centimeters. A little bit of caution is needed when sewing the hem for the side with the skirt, as you want to make sure you do not sew into this. So for me personally, I began sewing in the seam line with the skirt pulled to the back, and then when I finished, I used my sewing wheel to carefully go into the seam line without catching the skirt. After I hemmed the shorts, this is what everything looked like. At this point, it was time to give everything a good press. For the internal waistband, I'm measuring the top of the skort from one side to the other. And after cutting it out, this is what I ended up with. I'm going to serge both ends of the waistband. To attach the waistband, I'm simply pinning this on the outside of the skort. I started by attaching the waistband with a straight stitch along the top. So this is what we're currently working with, and I didn't show this, but I also serged the bottom of the waistband. I had to make a few adjustments to the zipper so that it would fit the way I wanted it to, just cutting some excess off the top, bottom and sides. To install the zipper, I pinned it in place right underneath the waistband down to the short seam and then sewed as close to the zipper teeth as possible and repeated this for the other side. Now that we've sewed in the zipper, we just need to finish off the waistband. To do this, we want to press in the waistband around 1 centimeter to follow the seam of the zipper, and then fold this down on the inside of the skort to conceal the zipper and gain a clean finish. As I am sewing the waistband in place, I will also continue down the length of the zipper and do a top stitch to finish. This part can be quite frustrating and a lot of patience is needed, especially if, like me, you despise adding zippers to your projects. You can see that my zipper is not completely invisible, however I still think it looks really neat. One of the last things I did for this project is top stitch the waistband. And then I went on to install the buttonhole on the belt strap, stitched the button on, and that's the project finished.